My daughter said it calmly, almost kindly. You don't really need money anymore. At your age, it's just numbers on paper. She said it across my own kitchen table, the one I bought 40 years ago, with my hands folded in my lap like a well-behaved child. I was 74 then, fully awake, fully aware, and for the first time in my life, quietly dismissed. I did not raise my voice. I did not cry. Women my age have learned that tears only make people speak slower to you, louder, as if volume replaces respect. I just looked at her and waited for the rest of the explanation, because there is always a rest. No one takes something from you without a story prepared in advance. She explained that she was only thinking of my comfort, that managing finances was stressful, that mistakes happen when people get older. She spoke like someone reading instructions on a medicine bottle: careful, responsible, empty. I listened and nodded, because that is what I have done my whole life when someone younger explains my own existence to me. I have lived in this house since I was 32. I paid off the mortgage early. I buried my husband from savings we built together. I balanced accounts, signed contracts, paid taxes, hired and fired people, and never once asked my daughter to rescue me. But sitting there, with her phone face down beside her coffee cup, I suddenly felt like an object being inventoried. She said it would be easier if she helped. At first, just oversight, then access, then decisions. The word temporary appeared several times, the way people use it when they mean forever. I asked her what exactly she thought I couldn't handle anymore. She smiled and said, "Mom, don't make this difficult." That sentence landed harder than the one about money. I noticed things after that. Papers she wanted me to sign quickly. Appointments she insisted on attending, just in case. Little jokes about my memory, said with a laugh that invited agreement from others. I am not senile. I forget names sometimes. So do people half my age who live glued to screens and call it normal. I did not argue. I watched. There is a kind of patience that comes with age. Not the soft kind, but the sharpened one. The kind you develop after decades of being underestimated. What my daughter did not understand was this: money was never the point. Control was. And control, once taken, is rarely returned out of kindness. I had built my life quietly. I could defend it the same way. That was the beginning, not the fight, not the court. Just the moment I realized that to my own child, I had already been written off. If you enjoy the stories here, dear, you're welcome to join our Patreon. There you'll find exclusive tales that never appear on YouTube, and new stories come out earlier than anywhere else. The link is just below. We're waiting for you. I have always lived carefully, but not fearfully. There is a difference, and people often confuse the two. Careful means you know what you have and why you have it. Fearful means you let someone else decide for you. I was never the second kind. At 74, my days were quiet, yes, but not empty. I woke up early because my body no longer allowed laziness. I made coffee the way I liked it, strong and unhurried. I read the paper all the way through, not just the headlines. I paid my bills on time, checked my accounts once a week, and kept a small notebook where I wrote down every expense, out of habit more than necessity. That notebook bothered my daughter. She once picked it up, flipped through it, and laughed. "You know the bank does all this for you now, right?" she said. I told her I knew. I also told her I liked seeing my own handwriting. She rolled her eyes, the way she used to when she was 16, and thought experience was just another word for being outdated. My money did not fall from the sky. I worked for 38 years at the same manufacturing office, starting as a clerk and ending as someone people came to when numbers didn't add up. I was never flashy. I saved when others spent. I said no when it was unpopular. When my husband died suddenly at 61, there was grief, but there was no chaos. The house stayed. The lights stayed on. I stayed standing. That seemed to disappoint her. She began visiting more often after she turned 50. Not for tea, not for conversation, for check-ins. She would glance around my living room, open my fridge without asking, comment on the temperature in the house. "You don't need it this warm," she'd say. Or, "You really should let me handle these things." These things. Everything was becoming these things. She asked about my will, casually, as if asking about the weather. She asked if I had considered simplifying my accounts. She asked if I ever felt confused. Each question was wrapped in concern, but concern can be sharpened into a tool if you use it long enough. I answered calmly, always calmly. I told her what I had already arranged, what was already documented, what professionals were already involved. Her face tightened when I mentioned names she didn't recognize. My accountant, my lawyer, people I trusted quietly and without drama. "You don't need all that anymore," she said once, almost impatient. "You should be resting." Resting. As if life ends when you stop producing something useful for others. I noticed how she spoke about my money as if it were already abstract. Not mine, not earned, just something waiting to be reassigned. She never asked what I wanted to do with it. She assumed wanting ended with age. But here is what people forget. When you live long enough, you learn the value of silence. I did not correct her. I did not defend myself. I observed the way she leaned forward when we talked about finances. The way her voice softened when she said, "Trust me." The way she avoided specifics. I was not afraid. I was alert. And once you see clearly, you cannot unsee it. The changes did not arrive all at once. They never do. If they did, even the most trusting woman would push back. Instead, they came in small, reasonable pieces, each one difficult to argue against on its own. First, she suggested I stop driving long distances. "Just until winter passes," she said. Then she began offering to do my grocery shopping, even when I told her I enjoyed choosing my own food. She started speaking to service people on my behalf, stepping slightly in front of me as if I were hard of hearing. I am not. My hearing is better than her patience. Then came the paperwork. She would bring envelopes and place them neatly on the table, already opened, already sorted. "These are boring," she'd say lightly. "I'll just explain what matters." When I asked to read them myself, she sighed, not loudly, but deeply, the way people do when they believe resistance is irrational. I noticed how often she used the word "we." We should think about simplifying. We don't need multiple accounts. We might want to prepare for the future. I asked her which future she meant. She laughed and said I was being dramatic. Once, when I took longer than she liked reviewing a document, she leaned back and said, "Mom, this is exactly what I'm talking about." I asked her to explain. She didn't. She just shook her head, as if my question proved her point. That was when I understood something important. She wasn't worried about my confusion. She was annoyed by my independence. She booked a doctor's appointment without asking me first. A general checkup, she said. Routine. She insisted on sitting in the room, answering questions meant for me. When I corrected her, she smiled apologetically at the doctor, as if indulging me. I watched his eyes flick from her to me. I made sure to meet his gaze and speak clearly. I have learned that clarity unsettles people who expect frailty. Afterward, in the parking lot, she said, "You didn't have to contradict me like that." I asked her why she spoke for me in the first place. She said, "Because I worry." Worry, apparently, now required authority. She began calling more often, sometimes twice a day, not to ask how I was, but to remind me of things, to check whether I'd paid something, to ask if I remembered a conversation we'd had. If I said yes too quickly, she'd narrow her eyes, like a teacher suspecting cheating. One afternoon, I overheard her on the phone in the next room. She didn't know I could hear her. She said my name, then lowered her voice. She used phrases like decline and realistic planning. She said, "I just don't want it all wasted." Wasted. I sat very still until the call ended. Then I asked her who she had been speaking to. She hesitated for half a second too long. "Just someone from work," she said. "Nothing for you to worry about." That was the moment I stopped pretending this was about care. Love does not erase a person piece by piece. Love does not rush signatures or resent questions. Love does not treat a capable woman like an obstacle to be managed. I went to bed that night and lay awake longer than usual. Not from fear, from calculation, from the slow assembling of facts in my mind, like documents laid out on a desk. She thought time was on her side. She thought age had made me slow. What she forgot was this: I had lived long enough to recognize a quiet takeover when I saw one. The first time she said it out loud, I almost missed it. We were sitting in my living room, the afternoon light slanting across the carpet, dust floating lazily in the air. She had come with a folder this time, thicker than usual, and placed it on the coffee table as if it belonged there. I poured tea. She didn't touch hers. "You know," she said, tapping the folder with one finger, "old people don't really need money the way they used to." She smiled when she said it, not cruelly, almost thoughtfully, as if she had reached a reasonable conclusion after careful analysis. I looked at her and waited. Silence has a way of making people continue. "You have everything you need," she went on. "The house is paid off. Your expenses are minimal. It's not like you're traveling or starting new projects." I asked her what she thought money was for. She blinked, caught off guard. "Security," she said finally. "Care. Comfort." "And who decides how much of that I deserve?" I asked. She waved her hand dismissively. "Mom, don't twist my words. I'm just being practical. At your age, hoarding money doesn't make sense." Hoarding, an ugly word, one usually reserved for people who have lost control. I reminded her, gently, that I had earned what I had, that I still paid my own bills, that I had plans, even if they didn't involve airplanes or new wardrobes. She laughed softly and leaned back. "You're thinking emotionally," she said. "That's normal." That was when something inside me cooled. I told her I was thinking very clearly, clear enough to hear what she wasn't saying, that she had already decided my role had changed, that I was no longer the owner, just the occupant. She sighed, irritation slipping through the cracks of her patience. "Why are you making this into a fight?" "I'm not," I said. "You are." She stood up and began pacing, the way she used to when she was younger, and didn't like being contradicted. She said I was being stubborn, that I was stuck in the past, that the world worked differently now. At one point she said, "Judges don't look kindly on families who don't plan ahead." That word again. Judges. I asked her what she meant by that. She stopped pacing and looked at me for a long moment. Then she said carefully, I just don't want things to get messy later. Later, when I was quieter, slower, easier to speak over. I told her there would be no mess because everything was already in order. I told her my affairs were none of her concern unless I invited her in. I told her I trusted professionals, not pressure. Her face hardened. "I'm trying to protect you," she said sharply. "From yourself, if necessary." I stood up then, slowly. I have learned that standing calmly can be more unsettling than shouting. "You don't get to protect me by taking me apart," I said. "And you don't get to decide when my life becomes surplus." She stared at me, stunned. For the first time, she saw that I was not confused, not tired, not yielding. She gathered her folder and left without finishing her tea. That evening, I sat alone and replayed every word. Not with regret, with precision, because now it was clear. This was no longer a family disagreement. This was positioning, and she had already chosen her side. I spent the next morning doing something I had not done in years. I took every document out of the safe and laid them across the dining table, not because I was confused, because I wanted to see my life in facts, not feelings. There were deeds, crisp and properly recorded. The house was solely in my name, purchased long before my daughter ever worried about my future. There were bank statements going back decades, steady lines of deposits and withdrawals that told a simple story of discipline. No sudden gaps, no erratic behavior, no signs of the chaos she hinted at when she spoke to others. I made coffee and worked slowly. Age gives you that privilege if you claim it. I read my will again. It was clear, current, and witnessed. I had revised it after my husband died, then again 5 years later, with a licensed attorney who specialized in elder law. Not the kind of lawyer who rushed clients through paperwork, but the kind who asked uncomfortable questions and waited for real answers. At the time, my daughter had shown little interest. Now she seemed very invested. That difference mattered. I found the folder labeled Medical, Advance Directive, Living Will, Power of Attorney. All carefully written, all naming people who were not my daughter. That had been a deliberate choice, made long before this tension began. Even then, some instinct had warned me that love and authority should not always live in the same hands. I wondered if she knew that already, or if she assumed she would simply step into the role when the time felt right to her. By noon, the table looked like an audit of a life well managed. I felt no panic looking at it, only clarity. In the afternoon, I drove myself to my attorney's office. He looked up when I walked in, surprised but not alarmed. That, too, mattered. He did not speak to me slowly. He did not ask if I was feeling all right. He asked what had changed. I told him the truth. Not dramatically, just accurately. I told him what my daughter had said, what she had suggested, the words she used, the pressure, the timing. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair and said, "You're not the first." That sentence settled something inside me. He explained the pattern in calm, professional terms. Adult children who mistake proximity for authority, who equate concern with entitlement, who believe that age alone is evidence. He told me how often courts saw this and how rarely they sided with assumption over documentation. Competence, he said, is not measured by age. It's measured by evidence. I asked him what I should expect next. He didn't hesitate. "If she's serious," he said, "she may try to question your capacity formally. It's unpleasant, but it's not uncommon." I nodded. I had already suspected as much. He asked me if I wanted to make changes. tighten anything, clarify boundaries. I said yes. We spent the next hour reviewing everything, updating language, reinforcing safeguards, ensuring that no single person could override my decisions without proof, process, and oversight. I signed carefully, not rushed, not shaken. When I left his office, the sun was low and the air felt sharp. I sat in my car for a moment before starting the engine. I did not feel betrayed. Betrayal implies surprise. What I felt was resolved. At home, I returned every document to the safe, except one copy I kept out on purpose. I placed it on the desk where she liked to sit when she visited, not as a threat, as a reminder. That evening, my phone rang. Her name lit up the screen. I did not answer. Not because I was afraid of the conversation, but because I was no longer willing to have it on her terms. She thought money made people careless. She was wrong. Money had taught me structure, patience, and how to prepare long before someone else decided I was done. She did not wait long. 2 days passed in a politeness so thin it felt staged. Short messages, neutral tone, questions that were really statements. Just checking in. Hope you're feeling well. The kind of concern that leaves no fingerprints. On the 3rd day, she came without calling. I heard her car in the driveway and felt a familiar tightening in my chest. Not fear, but recognition. This was escalation. I wiped my hands, walked to the door, and opened it before she could knock. She paused, surprised, then smiled as if we were both actors hitting their marks. I was in the neighborhood, she said. Of course she was. She stepped inside and glanced around, her eyes moving the way inspectors do. She noticed the desk immediately. The paper I had left there was still untouched. That irritated her more than if it had been gone. You didn't answer my call, she said, sitting down without being invited. I was busy, I replied. With what? With thinking. She pressed her lips together. You're making this harder than it needs to be. That sentence again. The universal anthem of people who want compliance, not understanding. She launched into logistics, doctors, finances. Support. She spoke faster than usual, as if speed could outrun resistance. She mentioned someone she knew whose mother had slipped quickly. She said she didn't want to wait until something went wrong. I asked her what, exactly, she believed was wrong now. She hesitated. Just a fraction. Then she said, I think you're vulnerable. Vulnerable. Another word that sounds gentle until it's used against you. I told her I had met with my attorney, that everything was reviewed, that my decisions were documented, that I was competent, protected, and not interested in delegating my life. Her expression shifted. Not anger yet. Calculation. You didn't tell me, she said. I didn't need to. She stood and began pacing, just like before. But now there was a sharpness to her movements. She said she was my daughter, that she had rights, that she wouldn't forgive herself if she did nothing and something happened. I asked her if she planned to do something. She stopped pacing and looked straight at me. If I have to. There it was. No softness left. That night, I slept lightly. Not because I was anxious, but because I was alert. You learn the difference after 70 years. Anxiety is noise. Alertness is quiet. The next morning, a letter arrived. Not handwritten, not personal, official. It was a notice requesting my presence for an evaluation. Polite language, neutral tone, concern dressed up as procedure. The implication sat just beneath the surface. My capacity had been questioned. I read it twice, then folded it carefully and placed it back in the envelope. So this was her move. I did not call her. I called my attorney. He was not surprised. "This is exactly why we prepared," he said. "Do not engage emotionally. Do not explain yourself to her. Show up. Answer questions. Let the facts speak." Facts. I trusted facts. In the days that followed, she grew colder. Messages turned formal. Her voice, when we spoke briefly, had an edge I didn't recognize. She stopped pretending this was about care and began framing it as responsibility. "You'll thank me later," she said once. I almost laughed. I gathered what was requested: medical records, financial summaries, letters from professionals who had known me for years, people who spoke to me as a woman, not a liability. On the morning of the evaluation, I dressed carefully. Not to impress, but to feel like myself. Navy jacket, comfortable shoes. My hair brushed the way I always wore it. When I looked in the mirror, I did not see someone fading. I saw someone being tested. And I have lived long enough to know this. When people try to take your voice quietly, the most powerful thing you can do is answer clearly, without apology. She believed this process would weaken me. She was about to learn the difference between age and absence of strength. The evaluation was not where the real damage happened. That came later, when my daughter chose an audience. It was a Sunday afternoon, the kind meant for quiet routines. I was standing in the bakery line when I heard my name spoken too loudly behind me. I turned and saw her with her husband and a couple I barely recognized. She smiled broadly, the public version of herself, and kissed my cheek. "Mom, you should have told me you were coming out today," she said, guiding me by the elbow as if I needed help walking. I pulled my arm away gently. "I've been coming here every Sunday for 15 years. She laughed. "See? That's what I mean. You forget how long things have been going on." The couple exchanged looks, curious ones. She ordered for me without asking. When I corrected her, she waved it off. "Don't argue, Mom. It's easier this way." Then she leaned closer to the others and said, half joking, "We're trying to keep things simple for her." Simple. For me. At the table, she told stories. Carefully chosen ones. About how I once misplaced my glasses. About how I mixed up dates last Christmas. About how she worries constantly. Each story landed softly, wrapped in concern, but together they formed a picture I did not recognize. I sat there quietly, hands folded, listening to my own life rewritten in smaller terms. Then she said it. "Well, honestly," she sighed, stirring her coffee, "old people don't really need money. It just creates confusion." There was a brief, uncomfortable silence. Her husband nodded. One of the women smiled sympathetically at me, not kindly, pityingly. Something in me settled then, not anger, finality. I set my fork down and looked directly at her. "You've said that before," I said. My voice was calm, even. "What you've never explained is why you think my age makes my property yours to manage." She stiffened. "I didn't say that." "You implied it," I replied, repeatedly, and in public. Her smile thinned. "You're being sensitive?" "No," I said. "I'm being precise." The table went quiet. Her husband cleared his throat. The couple suddenly found the menu fascinating. She leaned in, her voice low and sharp now. "You're embarrassing yourself." I met her eyes. "No, you're attempting to embarrass me. There's a difference." She stood up abruptly, knocking her chair back. "This is exactly why professionals need to be involved," she said, louder than necessary. "You can't even see how this looks." I stood as well, slowly, deliberately. "This," I said, "looks like a daughter explaining away her mother to make herself more comfortable." We left separately. Later that evening, my phone filled with messages. Concern masked as irritation. Accusations dressed up as worry. One line stood out. People are starting to notice. She was right. They were. But not in the way she hoped. The next morning, I received another letter. This one from a social services office requesting additional information. More oversight, more questions. She was no longer whispering. I made tea and sat at the kitchen table, the same one she'd spoken over weeks earlier. I felt no humiliation, despite her efforts. What I felt was clarity, sharpened by exposure. She had crossed a line. Not legally yet, but morally, unmistakably. There is something about being publicly diminished that changes a woman of my generation. We were raised to endure quietly, but we were also raised to recognize when silence becomes permission. I gathered my papers again, but this time with a different intention. Not defense. Preparation. If she wanted witnesses, she would get them. If she wanted judges, she would learn how carefully they listen. And if she believed humiliation would make me retreat, she had profoundly misunderstood what 74 years of surviving had taught me. I did not confront her after that afternoon. I did not send long messages or demand explanations. I have learned that when someone is building a case against you, every emotional reaction becomes another brick in their wall. Instead, I became very deliberate. I stopped answering calls unless there was a message first. I replied to texts slowly, briefly and without tone. Facts only. Dates, times, confirmations. Nothing she could twist into concern or confusion. Silence, used correctly, is not weakness. It is restraint. I also began documenting everything, every visit, every comment, every helpful suggestion. I wrote down dates, locations, witnesses. I kept copies of letters, emails, appointment notices. I did not embellish. I did not interpret. I simply recorded. It felt strange at first, treating my own daughter like a file, but reality does not change because it is uncomfortable. One afternoon, I drove to a different attorney's office, not to replace the first, but to add distance. Another set of eyes. Another professional voice. He reviewed what I had and nodded slowly. "She's building a narrative," he said. "But it's thin." That word mattered. Thin. He explained how these situations often unfolded, how some adult children believed repetition could replace evidence, how public concern, repeated often enough, began to sound like truth to outsiders. But courts, he said, were less interested in impressions than in proof. "Let her talk," he advised. "You prepare." I began reaching out to people who had known me consistently, not recently. My longtime doctor, the accountant who had handled my taxes for 20 years, a neighbor who checked on me weekly, not out of duty, but friendship. I asked them for written statements, not opinions. Observations. They were surprised, some of them. Concerned. But none hesitated. "You're sharper than most people I know," my accountant said, shaking his head. "I'll say that clearly." At home, I simplified nothing except my expectations. I continued my routines. Shopping, reading, walking, paying bills. I kept every receipt. I balanced accounts manually, the way I always had, and then printed the digital confirmations to match. Redundancy, I learned long ago, is the language systems understand. My daughter noticed the change. "You're pulling away," she said during one short phone call. "No," I replied. "I'm standing still." She didn't like that. Another notice arrived, requesting a formal review hearing. More official this time, more structured. I read it, noted the date, and placed it in my folder. That evening, I sat alone with the house, quiet around me. I thought of all the years I had spent smoothing things over, avoiding conflict, choosing peace even when it cost me ground. That habit had kept the family intact, but it had also taught my daughter something dangerous, that pressure worked. This time, it wouldn't. I did not feel lonely, despite what she might have assumed. There is a particular kind of solitude that comes with resolve. It is not empty. It is focused. Before bed, I wrote one more entry in my notebook. Not about money or documents, but about myself. About what I knew to be true. About my capacity, my intentions, my right to remain whole. If this was going to move forward, it would do so on a record I could stand behind without shame. She believed she was tightening control. What she didn't see was that I had already shifted the ground beneath her feet. By the time the hearing date arrived, I no longer thought of it as a threat. I thought of it as an appointment, one I intended to keep on my terms. The notice was written in language meant to sound neutral, but I had learned how to read between such lines. Assessment of capacity, best interests, protective oversight, words that pretended to be gentle while preparing a net. I placed the letter in my folder and added a tab. Organization is not just habit. It is a form of resistance. In the weeks leading up to it, my daughter tried a different approach. She stopped accusing and started reminiscing. She sent photos from years ago, messages that began with, "Do you remember?" She suggested lunch, just the two of us. She spoke softly, carefully, as if lowering her voice could erase what had already been set in motion. I declined without hostility. "I think it's best we let the process run," I told her. That sentence angered her more than shouting ever could have. Processes remove improvisation. They don't bend for charm. The day of the hearing, I arrived early. Not because I was nervous, but because punctuality has always been my quiet way of asserting presence. I wore a simple jacket, clean shoes, nothing dramatic. I did not want to look defiant or fragile. I wanted to look accurate. My attorney met me at the entrance. He nodded once, reassuringly, and took the folder from my hands. It was thick now, too thick to dismiss. Inside, the room was smaller than I expected. No elevated bench, no theatrics, just a table, a few officials, neutral faces trained to watch for signs rather than stories. My daughter sat across from me. She did not look at me at first. When she finally did, there was something new in her expression. Not confidence, apprehension. They began with routine questions: name, address, date. I answered clearly, without rushing. Then came the questions about finances. I explained how I managed them, how often I reviewed accounts, who advised me. I named people, firms, dates. Each answer landed quietly, like a stamp on paper. They asked about my health. I spoke about diagnoses I had, and those I didn't. I corrected a detail my daughter interjected without raising my voice. One of the officials raised an eyebrow at her, not me. Then they asked why this review had been requested. She spoke then, carefully, emotionally, about concern, about fear of decline, about love. She said she only wanted to help before something went wrong. No one interrupted her. When she finished, one of the officials turned to me and asked, "Do you feel you need help managing your affairs?" "No," I said. "Do you feel pressured to relinquish control?" "Yes," I said. The simplicity of the exchange seemed to unsettle her. My attorney presented the documents: letters, records, statements from professionals who had no stake in family dynamics. Evidence has a weight emotion cannot match. One official asked my daughter why she had not pursued mediation before formal action. She hesitated. said she didn't think it was necessary. That answer did not land well. The hearing ended without drama. No decision announced, just a statement that a ruling would follow after review. Outside, my daughter confronted me. "You made me look heartless," she said, her voice low and shaking. "I answered questions," I replied. "That's all." She stared at me as if seeing me clearly for the first time. Not as a role, not as a resource, as an obstacle she had underestimated. The letter arrived a week later. It was brief, formal, decisive. No finding of incapacity. No grounds for oversight, no transfer of authority. The request was denied in full. I read it once, then again. My hands did not shake. I placed the letter in the folder and closed it. Carefully, deliberately. Judges, I had learned, do not listen to who speaks loudest. They listen to who stands steady when asked simple questions. And I had never been steadier. She came 3 days after the letter arrived. Not with flowers, not with apologies. With certainty sharpened into anger. I saw her car pull into the driveway and felt nothing rise in me. No dread, no urge to rehearse. The fight, if that's what she wanted, was already behind me. I had said everything that mattered under oath. She knocked once, hard, then let herself in the way she used to when she still believed this house was partly hers. "You didn't have to take it that far," she said, before the door had even closed behind her. I was sitting at the table, reading. I marked my place and looked up at her. "Neither did you." She paced, restless, furious in a way that had nowhere useful to go. "You made them think I was some kind of villain," she said. "All I did was try to help you." I asked her to sit. She didn't. "What you did," I said evenly, "was question my competence in a formal setting without speaking to me honestly first." "I did speak to you," she snapped. "You just wouldn't listen." "I listened," I replied. "I simply didn't agree." She laughed, sharp and bitter. "You think this means you've won?" I considered that word. Won. "This wasn't a competition," I said. "It was a correction." She stopped pacing and looked at me then, really looked, as if trying to find the weakness she had counted on. "You embarrassed me," she said more quietly. "People are talking." "Yes," I said. "They are." Her jaw tightened. "You could have handled this privately." "You made it public," I reminded her. "At the bakery, with strangers, with officials." "That was different." "No," I said. "It wasn't." She sank into the chair across from me at last, suddenly tired. "You don't understand how hard this is for me." I nodded once. "You're right. I don't. Because I never asked you to manage my life." She stared at the table, then looked up again, defensive lines returning to her face. "So what now? You cut me out? Is that what you want?" I thought carefully before answering. Not because I was unsure, but because words, once spoken, become structure. "What I want," I said, "is clarity." She scoffed. "Meaning?" "Meaning my finances remain mine. My decisions remain mine. And if you want a relationship with me, it will be based on respect, not oversight." She shook her head slowly. "You're punishing me." "I'm protecting myself," I said. There was a long silence then, the kind that forces truth to surface or retreat entirely. I could see her weighing options, deciding which version of herself to present next. Finally, she said, "You've changed." "No," I said. "You just stopped controlling the conversation." She stood, smoothing her coat as if preparing for a meeting rather than leaving her mother's home. "Don't expect me to pretend this didn't happen." "I don't," I replied. "I expect you to remember it." At the door, she hesitated. For a moment, I thought she might soften. She didn't. "This isn't over," she said. I met her eyes calmly. "For the court, it is." After she left, the house felt quieter, but not emptier. I poured myself tea and sat by the window, watching the afternoon settle into evening. I had not lost a daughter that day. I had lost an illusion, and in its place, I had gained something steadier: the knowledge that my life, even now, even at my age, belonged fully to me. The weeks after the hearing were quieter, but not peaceful in the way people imagine. Peace is often confused with silence. What settled over my life was something more deliberate: a reordering. My daughter did not disappear. She simply changed tactics. She stopped coming by unannounced, but she started calling relatives. Distant ones. People who hadn't visited me in years but suddenly felt entitled to opinions. I would get polite calls that began with concern and ended with suggestions. "She's just worried about you. She means well. You know how things get at your age." At my age. As if years erase facts. I answered kindly, briefly. I did not argue. Arguing invites debate, and debate invites doubt. I stated the truth once and moved on. Some of them believed me, some didn't. That too was instructive. What surprised me was how quickly narratives spread when money is involved. Not because people are greedy, though some are, but because money gives people permission to imagine stakes where none exist. My daughter had told them she was afraid I'd be taken advantage of. She did not mention that the only person attempting to redirect my assets had been her. I heard about that omission from a cousin who still valued accuracy over loyalty. I did not correct the story publicly. I let it age on its own. False stories tend to rot when they're not fed. At home, I made changes, not dramatic ones, but firm ones. I changed locks, not because I feared intrusion, but because access should never be assumed. I updated emergency contacts. I reviewed beneficiary designations one final time and added an extra layer of oversight, purely procedural. No anger, just structure. I also reduced contact, not as punishment, as preservation. When she called, I answered only if I felt steady enough to remain factual. If not, I let it ring. I stopped explaining myself. Explanations had become her raw material. One afternoon, she sent a long message. Not angry, not apologetic, strategic. She wrote that she felt shut out, that she worried I was being influenced by outsiders, that family should come first, that judges didn't always understand emotional realities. I read it twice, then placed the phone face down. Judges understand realities very well. That is why they insist on evidence. I replied the next day with one sentence: "If you want to rebuild trust, it starts with respecting my decisions, not questioning my capacity." She did not respond. Time passed. A month. Then 2. People stopped calling. The concern dried up. Without constant reinforcement, the narrative lost momentum. Life has a way of correcting exaggeration through boredom. One morning, I noticed something unexpected. I felt lighter, not triumphant, unburdened. The constant vigilance I'd lived under for months eased. My routines returned to being routines instead of evidence. I cooked because I was hungry, not because I needed to prove something. I paid bills because they were due, not because someone was watching. Control, once reclaimed, does not announce itself. It simply stops asking permission. Near the end of summer, my daughter called again. Her voice was different. Tired. Careful. "I don't know how to talk to you anymore," she said. I believed her. "Then listen," I replied, without preparing a response. She was quiet for a long time. I didn't think it would go this far, she said finally. Neither did I answered. But you kept going. She did not apologize. Not fully. But she did not accuse me either. That was progress of a sort. We ended the call without resolution, but also without threat. That was when I understood something important. Not every ending needs closure to be complete. Some just need boundaries strong enough to hold. I had not destroyed my family. I had simply refused to be dismantled for their comfort. And that, I knew, would shape whatever came next far more than silence ever could. The second hearing came quietly. No confrontation, no warning speech, just a notice folded neatly into an envelope, delivered with the same neutral language as before. This time, it was not about capacity. It was about review, about whether the earlier decision should be reconsidered in light of ongoing family concerns. That phrase told me everything I needed to know. My daughter had not accepted the ruling. She had reframed it. I did not panic. Panic is for people who are unsure of their footing. I knew exactly where I stood, and more importantly, why. I called my attorney, read the notice aloud, and waited. She's hoping repetition will change the outcome, he said. It won't. Still, preparation mattered. This hearing would be shorter, narrower, less emotional. Judges do not like being asked the same question twice unless something material has changed. And nothing had. The morning of the hearing, I felt calm in a way that surprised even me. Not numb. Calm. The kind that comes when there is nothing left to defend except the truth. My daughter sat farther away this time. She did not look at me. Her lawyer spoke for her almost entirely. He used words like continued concern and family tension. He suggested that unresolved conflict itself was evidence of instability. That argument did not land. When it was my turn, I answered again. Clearly, consistently, without embellishment. The same facts, the same records, the same steady voice. Consistency, I have learned, is the most difficult thing to fake. One of the judges asked my daughter directly why she had pursued another review. She hesitated, then said she feared I was isolating myself. From whom? The judge asked. She glanced at me. From family. The judge nodded once and turned to me. Are you isolated? No, I said. I am selective. There was a pause, not awkward, considered. Another judge asked whether I felt coerced, neglected, or financially exploited. No, I said. On the contrary. That word shifted the room. When the ruling came, it was immediate this time. No delay, no further review. The previous decision stood. The court found no grounds for continued inquiry. The matter was closed. Closed. I felt no surge of victory, just relief. The kind that settles deep in the chest and stays there. Outside, my daughter stopped me again. Not angry this time. Something closer to wounded pride. They believed you, she said quietly. Yes, I replied, because I told the same truth every time. She looked at me then, really looked, and for the first time I saw uncertainty where entitlement used to live. I was just trying to help, she said. I know, I answered, but help that ignores consent becomes control. She didn't respond. We parted without an embrace, without a scene. Just two women walking in opposite directions, finally understanding the distance between them. At home that evening, I put the final court letter into the folder and closed the safe. I did not need to revisit it again. Some lessons, once documented, no longer require repetition. I made dinner, washed the dishes, and sat down with a book I had been meaning to finish. The house felt like mine again. not because it had ever stopped being so, but because no one was questioning that fact anymore. Judges, it turns out, do not share opinions. They share conclusions, and theirs had been clear. After the second ruling, something in my daughter finally broke. Not loudly, not in a way that invited sympathy, but quietly, the way rigid things crack when they've been bent too far. She stopped calling, not for days, for weeks. At first, I waited out of habit, not with hope, but with the reflex of a mother who had always anticipated the next need. Then, slowly, that reflex loosened. Mornings came and went without my phone lighting up. Afternoons passed without the familiar tension of wondering what version of her I would get that day. The silence did not feel punitive. It felt clean. People ask whether it hurt. Of course it did. Loss does not disappear just because it was necessary. But pain is not the same as regret. I did not regret protecting myself. What surprised me was how much space appeared once the noise stopped. I had room to think again, not defensively, not strategically, just honestly. I began noticing small things. How light moved across the floor in the late afternoon, how my joints ached less when I wasn't bracing myself, how meals tasted better when I wasn't eating them under an invisible evaluation. Control, I realized, had been costing me more energy than I admitted. I went back to my attorney one last time, not because something was wrong, but because I wanted to finish properly. We reviewed everything and then discussed what came next, if anything. "Do you want to change your will?" he asked. I thought about that question longer than any of the others he'd asked me over the years. I did not want revenge disguised as planning. I did not want to erase my daughter out of spite. But I also refused to reward behavior that had nearly stripped me of my autonomy. We adjusted things carefully, thoughtfully, proportionately, not as punishment, but as consequence. There is a difference, and adults understand it. When I signed the final documents, my hand was steady. I did not inform my daughter of the changes. She had taught me, after all, that information can be used as leverage. Silence, when chosen freely, is simply privacy. Autumn arrived softly that year. Leaves gathered on the porch steps, and I swept them without rushing. Neighbors waved. One stopped by with a loaf of bread and stayed for tea. Life continued. Not dramatically, not triumphantly, but sturdily. Then, one evening, my daughter called. Her voice was different again. Lower, less sure of itself. "I heard you updated your estate," she said. I did not ask how she heard. "Yes," I replied. There was a pause. "You didn't tell me." "No," I said. "I didn't." Another pause, longer this time. "I'm still your daughter," she said, as if reminding me of a fact I might have forgotten. "I know," I answered. "That's why this hurts." She inhaled sharply, then exhaled. "You don't trust me." "I trust you to be who you've shown me," I said. "And I've adjusted accordingly." She was silent. "I never wanted to hurt you," she said finally. "I believe that," I replied, "but intention doesn't erase impact." We ended the call without resolution. Again. But this time, I did not feel the need for more. The conversation had landed where it needed to. That night, I sat by the window and watched the dark settle in. I thought about all the years I had been told, by doctors, by family, by society, that aging meant shrinking. Less relevance, less authority, less right to decide. What none of them had said outright was this: if you do not defend your boundaries, someone else will redefine them for you. Judges had done their part. Papers were signed. Decisions recorded. Now it was my turn to live inside those decisions, not defensively, not defiantly, but fully. I was still here, still capable, still mine. Winter came early that year, sharp and decisive. The kind that doesn't drift in gently, but announces itself overnight. Frost biting the edges of everything it touches. I welcomed it. Cold has a way of clarifying what matters. My daughter did not visit. She did not call. Weeks stretched into months, and with each one, something in me settled further into place. I stopped waiting for reconciliation shaped like apology. I stopped rehearsing conversations that might never happen. Acceptance, I learned, is not agreement. It is simply the decision to stop arguing with reality. Life grew smaller in the best possible way. I organized my days around what I could hold in my hands. Warm cups of tea, books with spines cracked from use, slow walks that reminded me my body still responded when I listened to it. I volunteered once a week at the library, shelving books and helping children find stories. No one questioned my competence there. No one spoke over me. They asked, and I answered. It was enough. In January, I received a card. No return address. Inside, my daughter had written only a few lines. Not an apology. Not an accusation. I hope you're well. I'm trying to understand things from your perspective. I don't know how yet. I read it twice and placed it in the drawer. Understanding cannot be rushed, and it cannot be forced. In early spring, she finally came. She stood on the porch longer than necessary before knocking. When I opened the door, she looked thinner, tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. For a moment, we simply looked at each other, two women bound by history and divided by choices. "May I come in?" she asked. "Yes," I said. Nothing more. We sat at the kitchen table, the same one where she had once spoken about money as if it were an inconvenience I no longer deserved. She didn't bring folders this time. No documents. No rehearsed arguments. "I didn't realize how much of your life I was trying to manage," she said finally. "I thought I was being responsible." "I know," I replied. "That's what made it dangerous." She flinched, but she didn't argue. "I was afraid," she admitted, "of losing you, of being left with chaos." "You don't prevent chaos by creating it," I said gently. She nodded, eyes fixed on the table. "I thought the court would side with me." "I know," I said again. There was a long silence. Not hostile, not warm, honest. "I don't expect things to go back to how they were," she said. "They can't," I answered. "And they shouldn't." She looked up then. "Is there any way forward?" I considered her carefully. This was not a moment for generosity born of guilt or fear. This was about truth. "There is," I said. "But it won't look like control disguised as care. And it won't involve my money, my decisions, or my capacity being up for discussion." She nodded slowly. "I can try." "Trying is not enough," I said. "Respect is required." She swallowed and nodded again. We spoke for another hour, not about the court, not about documents, about ordinary things, books, weather, her work, nothing that gave either of us leverage. When she left, she hugged me briefly, carefully, as if afraid to overstep. After she was gone, I did not rush to interpret the visit. I did not label it reconciliation. I let it be what it was, a beginning, or maybe just an acknowledgement. Some bridges are not rebuilt. Some are replaced with paths that require more walking and less assumption. That night, I stood at the window again, watching the last of the snow melt into dark soil. The world does not restore itself to former shapes. It adapts. So do women who refuse to disappear quietly. I had not been saved by the court. I had been recognized. And that at my age felt like a victory no one could take away. I turned 75 the week the lilacs bloomed. There was no party, no cake crowded with candles. Just a quiet morning, sunlight on the kitchen floor, and the sound of birds arguing in the hedge like they always had. I made coffee, stood by the window, and let myself feel the weight of the year. Not as a burden, but as proof. I was still here. For the first time in a long while, my birthday passed without tension. No phone call filled with expectation. No careful wording on my part. My daughter sent a short message in the afternoon. "Happy birthday. I hope you're well." I replied, "Thank you. I am." And that was true. What surprised me most, looking back, was not that the judges ruled in my favor. It was how quickly the world adjusted once the decision was made. Banks treated me the same. Doctors spoke directly to me. Life resumed its ordinary respect the moment it was legally required to. It made me wonder how often older women lose ground, not because they are incapable, but because they are tired of insisting. I thought of all the times I had stayed quiet to keep the peace. All the moments I had accepted being spoken for, spoken over, spoken about. I had told myself it was love, or patience, or age. It wasn't. It was habit. Money, I learned, was never the real argument. Money was just the excuse that made control sound reasonable. What my daughter wanted, what many people want when their parents age, was certainty, predictability, a sense that nothing would surprise them. But life does not owe anyone that. I did not cut my daughter out of my heart. I simply removed her from positions she had proven she could not hold responsibly. There is a difference, and it matters. Love without boundaries is not generosity. It is surrender. Now my days are quieter. I choose what I want to choose. I give when I want to give. I keep what I want to keep. No one monitors my spending. No one evaluates my clarity. No one explains my own life back to me in smaller words. I am not reckless. I am not bitter. I am not lonely. I am intact. Sometimes women my age ask me how I found the courage to stand up to my own child. I tell them the truth. Courage had nothing to do with it. Clarity did. There comes a moment when you realize that silence is no longer peace. It is permission. And permission, once given, is hard to take back. If there is one thing I know now, it is this. Age does not erase your right to decide. It does not turn your possessions into communal property or your judgment into a public debate. Competence does not expire just because someone younger grows impatient. Judges understand that. Documents prove that. But most importantly, you must believe it yourself. I still sit at the same kitchen table, the same one where I was once told I didn't need money anymore. Now it holds my notebooks, my mail, my plans. Not grand ones, honest ones. I do not know what the future holds. None of us ever do. But I know this much. It will be mine to face, with my name on every decision that matters. And if you are reading this and recognizing pieces of your own life, if someone has made you feel smaller, less capable, less entitled to your own choices because of your age, remember this story, not as inspiration, as permission. If it resonated with you, don't stay silent. Share your thoughts. Your voice still counts, more than they want you to believe.